Greetings. My name is Barry Martin Snyder, and our website is luminousself.com and Way of the Christ with a dash between all the words.net. Today I'm going to pick up the story of my journey with Christ, part 2. I'm going to backtrack a little bit in time sequence in this journey to when I was having my Kundalini awakenings in Kauai. As the soul center above the heart opened and the living presence of God within became fully conscious and fused my entire sense of being, I would experience these periodic deep descents or dives deep into the darkness of the unconscious. And they were sort of death-like experiences where the whole sense of who I thought I was dissolved. In one of those experiences, I was lying in my bathtub, just doing some very deep breathing and letting go of more levels of contraction I was experiencing more and more as the Kundalini rose and the chakras opened. Everywhere there was holding and contraction was becoming more and more apparent. So I was lying in my bathtub doing some very deep breathing when I realized that I was just plunging deeper and deeper into this place that I had never been before. Everything became so still as to be beyond stillness. And all sense of a me, a body, a being within that body began to dissolve more and more deeply. And all that was left was this hum. I guess it was the primordial Om of creation. That's all there was, just this sound emanating to infinity. I had sat in this space for some time, although there was no time, and I gradually began to emerge. And it was like emerging from death, or possibly emerging as a newborn infant. And as I emerged and came back into the body, there was this sense of a new experience of what I was. I couldn't put words on it, and I still can't, because words can't describe what we truly are. I managed to get myself out of the bathtub, crawling, because the control or relationship to the body just wasn't there. I guess it might be something like a newborn infant, not having any connection or control of the body. I wrapped a bath towel around myself and managed to get the bathroom door open, was crawling out into the hallway trying to get back to my bedroom, when my roommate at the time heard this noise and came to find out what was going on. She looked down at me with this inquisitive look on her face, like, "What's going on with you?" I looked up at her, and spontaneously, out of the core of my being, this exclamation of truth arose and said, "I am the awakening Christ." This was a profound moment in the journey. For the truth of what we really are and what is nascent in each of us and is unfolding now rapidly, day after day, is that we are the awakening Christ. It took me a while to realize that it wasn't just about me. It caused a lot of confusion for a while, because I was really afraid of rampant egoism, but then I realized, no, this is just something, the realization that we're all going to have, that each of us is an awakening Christ. And that formed the seed crystal going ahead of knowing absolutely with clarity who I was and what the destination of this journey was. I was what that being Yeshua had demonstrated to us, and many others like Krishna, Zoroaster, Buddha. We are each that soul in full realization of its nature is one with God, one all that is. Probably the next major step that I remember now is in the months during this process, I would go out each day to go to different places on the beautiful island of Kauai to deepen in my embodiment. One such day I stopped at the local health food store called Kapuna Natural Foods, run by a beautiful soul named Ambrose. And as I walked in, I was attracted to the frozen food section where I thought I might get something for later in the day. And I was looking at the frozen foods, trying to see what sounded good. And all of a sudden there was a bright flash of light that I naturally thought was a camera flash. Because on the island of Kauai, flashes were going off all the time as tourists came and went taking pictures. When I turned around, there were no tourists. There were no cameras. There was one person standing in the doorway. A woman. A radiant woman. As I looked at her, I somehow knew who she was. I knew she was the wife of the man who had been rolfing me. But I knew there was something deeper. So I walked over to her and I said to her, "You're the wife of my rolfer, Wilhelm, aren't you?" And she said, "Yes." When I looked into her eyes, this center in my being where the divine was living, that I experienced the God in me, blew wide open. And in her eyes, I saw my eyes and I saw myself. And I knew that I was the same being in her and she was the same being in me. Unequivocal, unquestionable. And I had never experienced that with anyone else. Later, she would admit that she also saw this flash of light. And I came to understand that that flash of light was the Godhead, the source presence, coming down into our beings in the moment we reunited. Because twin flames come from the same flame presence that comes out of source, the same fractal of God that divides into two souls that go on a journey until they reunite. And when they reunite, the fullness of the Godhead comes down like a bolt of lightning and enters into their soul. I went back to New Mexico after this time. I was called to go there for a reason I didn't know. I thought it was actually for one purpose, but it was for another. And I was living on a mesa outside of Taos. as I mentioned in the earlier video, wondering what was next. I really didn't know, except there was this feeling of needing to be of service. And that's when the Christ came to me, as I mentioned in the last video again, and asked me if I would serve the office of the Christ. After I had agreed that I would, based on the premise that I would not be responsible, that Yeshua would guide me step by step and take full authority, and I would completely surrender myself to His will. Essentially, my life was ending, and my life in Christ was beginning. Having agreed to serve Him, the first thing He wanted was for me to know the bigger picture. And so He had asked me to open up Revelations 10 and begin to read the Proclamations of the seventh angel. As I did, He began to relay to me the deeper meaning of some of these passages. One of these passages says, "Time shall be no more." He directed me to purchase a copy of the Lamsa version of the Bible, which was written in Aramaic, the original tongue of Christ. And I read Revelation 10. In the Lamsa version, it said, "There will be no more reckoning of time." In subsequent meditations, He came to show me this, that there'll be no more reckoning of time means that we will not perceive or live in time as it has been known. As I contemplated that, I realized that time was the vector that led us beyond third-dimensional reality into fourth and beyond. Time is how we experience third-dimensional existence, as our limited boundary, where we live day by day in a linear sense from past to future. And that our lives is a series of events strung out like beads on this string of time, and that this was coming to an end. That we would no longer be living in this sense of linear time. That we would emerge into the eternal now of eternity. And that necessarily meant that we would no longer be living in third-dimensional reality. We would essentially be living in fourth-dimensional reality and beyond. And He confirmed that this is the essence of what lays ahead of us at the end of time. The end of time is really more than just about the end of this cycle of creation. What is about going through the singularity in time to re-experience ourselves as a new soul-awakened species, conscious of eternity, of our true nature. Gone would be our linear history that seems to bog us down. It's the basis the ego lives in. Always projecting the future, the past on the future, on the present, and worried about the future. All that gone. Many of you are probably experiencing more and more living in the now. One of the ways that we experience that is our linear memory begins to fade. We don't remember the past because it's fading. It's going away. It must. But we will know in each moment. One of the other passages in Revelations 10 was the kingdom of our Lord shall become the kingdom of His God, our Son, the Christ. As I contemplated this, I came to understand that what lies beyond this end of time, on the other side of the singularity, is a Christ-conscious world. What does that mean? A world in which we know we are the holy sons and daughters of God, when our true nature is that of a soul, is that we are part and parcel to God. And we would live in that consciousness. And living in that consciousness, we would project our inner revelation as creative beings out into our outer world. And thus, the outer world, being an infinitely creative matrix, would but come to reflect it. And that the Christ-conscious world, the new Eden, the new earth heaven, that we all hoped and planned for in our coming, would come to pass as an externalization of this new consciousness. And this is how we come into the new earth heaven. It is an externalization of a realization, our true eternal or Christ itself. And this was the goal, this is the journey. I knew this was what I was here for, to be part of realizing and facilitating that. A week or two later, Christ returned again. And when he did, I experienced a descent of this luminous, multicolored robe coming down and enfolding me. And I heard it was the robe of the Christ. And when this robe enfolded me, I knew that now this was the totality of my service. That I was now clothed in the robe, and that I would walk with this robe through to the end of time and beyond. And that to serve this robe was symbolic of the realization and my service to the office of the Christ. Since then, I have experienced a few other people receive the robe. And I'm telling you this, I'm sharing you this, like all things in this journey, to open up the realm of possibility in the mind. To know that this robe may be coming to you at some time. To open to receive it. For it has been the greatest gift in this journey. After this, my outer service began. As I mentioned in the previous video, even though I lived far out on the mesa in Taos, people would come to my door. They would find me and would ask if I would sit with them, if I could heal them, help them get through some problem they had. And I had no capacity to do this. I knew that. I had no training in this. Nothing I could offer. But I just knew to ask them to lay on my massage table. And I went into prayer and I called to Christ. And I would always experience that image of Christ that was painted from the shroud. And when I did, the Christ energy would descend down into and through me and into this being who would be lying on the table. And I would simply sit with them and ask them to stay inside, to go inside, to breathe and feel and experience what was alive in them, what was unfolding. And all I did was help them be present with what they were experiencing. And the Christ presence did everything else. They would go on a journey. A mysterious, non-linear journey. When things are brought to their awareness, they experience feelings, images, thoughts. And each journey had its life. When they ended, the person would be more clear and free, often radiant, get off the table and thank me and leave, having gotten what they came to receive. And this was the seed crystal of everything that would proceed from there on out. During this time, I had been studying much about crystals and sacred geometry. Things about the architecture of the planet energetically, pyramidal technologies. Have been going on for some time, been guided to. I was also made aware of something called the Christ Consciousness Grid, which is this luminous grid of Christ's presence that was above the planet. It seemed like it was up there 30 to 50 miles. It had been woven together there by many awakened Christed beings, ascended masters, etc. And Christ told me that what was happening is that this Christ grid was now being woven into the planetary grid, which is a grid of sacred geometry, of an icosahedral grid that surrounds the planet. And that the next step was to bring that grid down into the earth. And I was to build a 6-sided Star of David etheric pyramid using crystals that would connect with that grid. I won't go into the specifics of how this etheric pyramid was built, but I'll just say that 6 Star of David crystal grids were placed at the points of a larger 6-pointed Star of David that covered the whole landscape, covering about 50 square miles, 50 miles in diameter, with 6 points all surrounding the Taos Basin. And of course, at each one of these points was a pyramid made out of 6 crystals. I was awakened before dawn each day that I was to go out to do this, not knowing. I was never informed in advance. I was told to go to a certain point. And I would go out to that point on this grid map and bury these crystals. And then I would hold the crystals, and the Christ energy and consciousness would come into me and infuse these crystals. After each one of these grid activations, building one of these smaller grid patterns, the tremendous thunderstorms would roll into the Taos Basin. And this went on the whole summer while I built these pyramids. And that summer, Taos, New Mexico, which is in the high desert, was the wettest spot in the U.S. My twin flame, Karen, came to meet me at Lama. Actually, I met her at Lama. She was going down to do the Dances of Universal Peace. And I knew it was time to tell her we were twin flames and we should be together. I went to see her and told her this. And she actually thought I was just a New Age fantasy. But she agreed to come to Taos to build the last grid in the center of the Star of David grid on the map. And when we did, huge thunderstorms surrounded us on all sides, lightning coming down when we built this grid. And when this happened, a pillar of light went up from this center up to the Christ consciousness grid, and it descended into the earth. And the work was done. she went back to her home in Montana. And as the fall came to Taos, I felt it was time to move on again. I had met a woman named Robin who was equally knowledgeable in all the things of sacred science that I had been studying. And I was told to go back to Kauai, where I would build a room where the Christ of the Etheric Pyramid that I built in Taos would be incorporated into a healing modality, or actually a Christing modality, that individuals would lie in and have an experience. So Robin and I went back to the island of Kauai, to the North Shore, the wettest spot in the world, down below Mount Waialeale. It rained continuously. It needed so much feminine to bring in this project. And I would sit each day and just be shown what to do to build this, what we call at the time the Matrix. And over the period of a few months, Robin and I engineered this creation into existence. Of a pyramid built by crystals, a blanket with a sacred DNA grid in it that opened up the causal chakras, the soul star above the head and the earth star below the feet, and allowed the oversoul and I am presence to come down and descend into the body. The oversoul at first, later the I am presence, and a secondary generation of it. And one day we sat in that little home in Wainea looking at this thing before us. Completed. It was a table with these transducer grids. I'll include a couple pictures here of it. And just this amazing energy and presence. This most sacred feeling and knowing that again a new journey had begun. This awesome sense of gratitude that somehow this was given to us. And Robin didn't feel to be part of it. She needed to go back to the mainland of Massachusetts and begin her life journey, but it was now mine to continue with. And I wrote to Karen and I said, Karen, I think it's time to be together. I can't do this by myself. It needs what we have together. It needs the divine feminine to hold this. And after some conversations on both ends, she got that it was true. It was time to come to Kauai to come together. And she did so on Valentine's Day in 1989. And the real service began then. Because what we were to do took two beings, in this case two twin flames, to hold the space for it. And so it does continue so to this day. The two that are one came together. To be the vessels to bring forth Christ consciousness and embark on a journey. And we would travel all around the western U.S., Hawaii, taking this room that was created many places. We'll end this story for now, and in the next chapter, we'll relay more of that. Know that the whole purpose of this is not for me to tell my story, simply for you to hear it, but it's for you to open up to the possibility that you too will have your journey in the Christ consciousness. It may be with Yeshua, Christ Jesus, it may be with some other outworking of the Christ, whether it's the universal Christ as pure light presence, some ascended being, whatever. It'll be your way, it'll be your service. But it's time now, that's why this is being put out. We're in the birthing stages now. We're in the chrysalis on a planetary level. Many of you are going to be brought into your service. So I tell this story to activate that possibility in you, each of you. So much love and many blessings. Aloha.